Just finished reading a couple of comments by a person called Mustno, Mustno3, where he made a number of comments. Now, what I did was I'll provide a link to the original video so you can actually see the comments and the full explanation. I addressed the issue of where I stated Islam within the orthodox parameters of it as being anti-pluralism. He stated, I wonder why the Jews fled Spain after it was invaded by Christians. I've already addressed that in a previous video, which was a reply to Mr. Talul regarding Muslims who continuously live in the past. We aren't living in 800 years ago in Muslim Spain. We're living in 2009. And just to give a brief overview, to somehow use Spain as an example of Islam is completely avoiding the fact that the Islam within inside Spain was about as far from Islam as you could possibly can get. It had drinking, it had gambling, it had prostitution. It was the Las Vegas of the Islamic world. So let's not try to kid ourselves. Let's not try to delude ourselves that that Islamic Spain was par excellence when it comes to Islam actually being implemented. It was as far from, like I said, Islam as you possibly can get. It's about as much a Jewish state as Israel when we're talking about Mosaic law. You talk to any Israeli and most of them prefer, will say that it's a Jewish state as by, ethnicity or religiosity, but in terms of a Jewish state, quote unquote, as a theocracy, no. What you're trying to insinuate, this person's trying to insinuate, is that there was some sort of Islamic theocracy that existed that never actually existed. So that's what I find funny. Like I said, it's about as far from Islam as you could possibly get. They were pretty much Islam in name only, in the same way that a person will call themselves Christian, but simply only turn up to, church a couple of times a year for the holy day of obligations, Christmas, Ash Wednesday, Good Friday, Easter Sunday, and so forth. In regards to a second point which you raised, which was quite interesting, is something that's a common cycle which I hear from Muslims, is they try to hide themselves, they try to cloak themselves in the shroud of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism by renouncing human rights, by claiming that human rights, by their nature, are Western culture being exported to other people, rather than actually seeing them as values which are not linked to a particular culture, but these are universal values, universal concepts, universal morals that are not pegged to a particular culture, race, or religion. Now, he noted, for example, I talked about the way in which I used one example, but the point of using that one example was to show the incompatibility in terms of modernity and human rights when it comes to Islamic countries. When we're talking about Islamic countries, we're talking about Islamic orthodoxy. We're not talking about niche areas which are about as far from Islamic orthodoxy as you possibly get. And Islamic orthodoxy is the general consensus that's held by scholars, and there is general consensus. You see it within the Tasfirs and the exegesis when it brings in, for example, the Hadith and the Sunnah. You look at the fatwas from the four madhabs, for example, and that's what we're talking about mainstream. So in terms of, I use that as an example of poor human rights and the lack of compatibility between orthodoxy and modernity. What I find interesting is that he tries to then turn around and change the direction of the conversation by stating that I want carbon copy clones. Again, this is a prime example of a person who's trying to move the conversation away from human rights, away from a universal concept, to try to claim that human rights is an invention of Western culture and therefore it is Western imperialism by stealth coming into Muslim countries. It seems to be a person who is anti-human rights, who wants to justify tyranny and hate and intolerance and bigotry under the guise of protection or preservation of one's cultural or religious identity from the so-called invading barbarians, quote unquote. So what we're seeing is a deliberate attempt by a person to shape the conversation in such a way that makes them out to being the victims, that somehow there is this force of immorality that's getting spread around the world and they're at the vanguard of trying to stop it. This is the same sort of technique that you see the Muslim Brotherhood, that you see Al-Qaeda, that you see Hamas, that you see Hezbollah. This is the same sort of rhetoric that you see within inside these anti-modern Islamists, if you're going to use such a term, ideological groups that try to justify their tyrannical regime within the cloak of Islam. So I'll let you guys think about that for a while, and I'd love to hear some feedback in regards to it.